Well, hello everyone. My name is Simone Murray. It's my huge pleasure to be welcoming you to this session of the Digital Writers Festival for 2018. And our topic tonight is 21 years of Amazon reader reviews. And we're looking at what's changed in literary culture and how since the advent of this particular kind of technology. So to begin with, I wanted to do a welcome to country that the festival has asked me to do. I wanted to acknowledge the First Nations and the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations on which this broadcast takes place. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to the elders of the lands that this broadcast reaches. That's not the end of our introductions, actually. We have many more. As I said, my name is Simone Murray. I'm an associate professor in literary studies at Monash University. And the reasons for this discussion tonight are twofold. One, we wanted to acknowledge that it is 21 years since Amazon reader reviews kicked off. And also we wanted to launch a book. You can see some champagne over here. You can see a book over there. This is a bit of conspicuous product placement. Basically, we wanted to launch the book that's just come out with Johns Hopkins University Press called The Digital Literary Sphere, Reading, Writing and Selling Books in the Internet Era. Now, my pleasure is particularly that a number of experts in the field of digital literary culture agreed to be part of this tonight. And I couldn't be more delighted because we've got a range of expertise here that spans continents and expands different kinds of disciplinary perspectives. So I think I will let them introduce themselves. Perhaps if each of you, and I'll go through the order that you're appearing on my screen, but I'll give you a heads up. Perhaps if each of you could state your name and where you're based, your institutional affiliation, but also give us a sense of what background you come to the discussion with, what kinds of things you normally study. Corinna, you're first cab off the rank.
Okay. Hi, good evening or good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Corinna Noiré-Gruhl. I am an assistant professor of book studies at the Gutenberg Institute for World Literature and Written Media at the University of Mainz in Germany. I think that's all you need to know. I'm very pleased to be here and to launch this book with Simone. Thank you.
Fantastic. Can I throw to you, Eva, in Australia?
Hi, I'm Eka Willis. I am a senior lecturer in English literatures at Wellington University, and I'm talking to you today from Eden on the New South Wales coast in the lands of the Yuin Nation. I am literature. My speciality is reception studies, so I'm interested in ways in which readers interpret, make use of, subvert the text that they read.
Thanks so much. Can I throw to you, Rachel, in Amazon heartland of the west coast of the States?
Of course. I'm Rachel Norda. I'm the director of the book publishing program at Portland State University, and I am also an assistant professor in English in that same department. So yeah, I'm in Oregon in the United States. And the background that I come from and the research that most interests me has to do with small business and entrepreneurship and marketing as they apply to publishing, of course.
Okay, that takes us, thank you, Rachel. That takes us over to the UK now. Bronwyn Thomas on the south coast of England.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, my name's Bronwyn and I'm Professor of English and New Media. And my background really is in literature, but became interested in new media narratives and also fan fiction, which led me to the whole reading thing.
Fantastic. And also in Britain, but further north, Simon Rowberry.
Hi, thanks, Simone. Simon Rowberry, I'm a lecturer in digital media and publishing at the University of Stirling in Scotland, and my interest is largely based upon the Kindle, which I've been working on for the last few years, and also using big data for reading.
Fantastic. That gives us a sense of who's present. We're still hoping that Dr. Ann Steiner from Sweden will also be able to join us, technological snafus permitting. But in the meantime, another technology point for you is that anybody watching the broadcast in real time who would like to send us a question or a comment on Twitter, then please do. The hashtag is DWF for Digital Writers Festival, 2018, and I'll be keeping an eye on the Twitter feed while we're talking, and we'd be very interested in responding to questions and comments that you might have. Well, that takes us to the end of the introductory part. I think it's now time to get into the meat of the discussion. And given the jumping off point for what we're talking about in this session is that it's 21 years now since Amazon set up its reader reviews, I thought I'd just do a little bit of backgrounding on how we get to the point where reader reviews are a possible thing on the internet. For someone who was doing their PhD at the time, I can actually still remember what it was like when Amazon reader reviews kicked off, and what a quirky and bizarre thing it was. So in terms of factual background, Jeff Bezos sets up the administrative machinery for Amazon in 1994, but the company really goes live in a public way in 95. And it's 2 years after that, in 1997, where the idea that amateur readers could be reviewing books and putting their reviews out there online becomes a reality on Amazon's website. And the rhetoric around this at the time from Bezos was very much about, we will, quoting here, let truth loose. I mean, this was in the era when people said things like information wants to be free with a straight face, whereas now we say things like data wants to be owned. But back then, 21 years ago, it was possible to say this kind of internet utopianism with a straight face. And it was certainly one of his intentions at the beginning that critical hierarchy would be leveled, that there would be a possibility for ordinary consumers to weigh in on their opinions about the books they were reading. But of course, that was never the only game in town, and there were obvious commercial reasons as well why Amazon wanted to set up the reader review facility. Simon, you're the master of all things to do with Amazon and Kindle. Did you want to speak to that, the idea of consciously creating a commercial community right from the beginning of Amazon?
Sure, yeah. So in my research into the Kindle, what I kind of argued is that when Amazon came up with the idea, it was the natural conclusion of this user-driven data. So when the Kindle came out, recommendations were included and adverts were displayed. So a lot of this information was fed into this bigger machinery, and it all became about generating more content that the users wanted. So the rise of self-publishing has come off the back of the fact that now we can see exactly what people want, what people read, how far through it they read. So we can see the Kindle as the natural conclusion of this user-driven method that they employed.
Yeah, I think what you highlight there is the way that the rhetoric around democracy and user empowerment has always been really deeply intertwined with the idea to basically get free market research data about the user. I mean, back in 1997, the real motivation was the fact that the website had so much white space that they couldn't fill. And the idea that users might fill it themselves on the cheap and then stick around on the site for much longer and, of course, buy more things while they were there was one of the big appeals of having reader reviews. So the rhetoric of, let truth loose was always going hand in glove with a much more commercial imperative to drive traffic to the site and to keep user stickiness on the site as well. Bronwyn, I know that you've done a lot of research in fan practices. Is this mistaken to think that Amazon was the first time the amateur voice got heard? I mean, it really has a longer history than that, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I guess if you were to talk about it in those terms, although I think the commercialization is the new aspect. So fan cultures, it's always been about the so-called gift economy, where you would give your labor for free. I mean, that's become more controversial recently, but in the kind of utopian past, I guess that would have been the idea that not only would you kind of comment on other people's work, but you might go as far as to edit and so on. So it would be kind of contributing to the creative process, as well as, commenting on somebody else's output. I think also for me, a kind of key factor here is the kind of context of convergence. Maybe the idea of, particularly as we're talking about books, literary culture and media cultures kind of merging and blurring into one another during this same period, which I think has probably also kind of contributed to the possibility of this space and it being taken up so enthusiastically.
Yeah, I remember coming across something when I was putting the book together that it interested me that very early on there were some people writing to Bezos and his team saying, are you aware that a lot of these reviews are very negative? Like, how are you going to sell books by promoting negative reviews, putting up there? And his fallback was always, well, the consumer will speak and the consumer will say what they want. But it emerged very early on in the piece that there were strategies to begin gaming the system, which led to a lot of reviewer scandals around Amazon reviews. I wondered if any of you wanted to dig down into some of the dirty history of Amazon reviewing scandals. And we can always get a few laughs out of it while we're talking about it.
Well, I've been the recipient of a bad review. My academic book, which is called Fictional Dialogue, got a 1 star from somebody who's complained about the fact that the book didn't teach them how to write dialogues. So I think this is a good example in a way, because somebody then came back and posted a comment saying, it's okay, the book's fine, you've just got it wrong. So there was a kind of balancing out, because somebody, but the 1 star review is still there. And I kind of have to just live with it, I suppose.
Were you the person that wrote back and said?
No, I wasn't. Although I have heard, I do know of other colleagues who have reviews that I have a strong suspicion were written by friends and family.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this has dogged the Amazon reviews from the beginning. The idea of self-reviewing and sock puppet reviewing, where you pretend to be a number of people having a conversation about your book, but ultimately it's all coming from one source. Taking down your competitors by giving them savage reviews. There were some scandals in the crime writing community about this. And vote washing as well. What Bronwyn just alluded to was attempts to demote reviews in the hierarchy so they don't display on the first page, which is something Goodreads has also had experience with. To their credit, Amazon's done some things with their terms of service to try and tighten this up. They're now linking reviewer identities to credit card records. So if you want to create 21 different identities, you're going to need 21 different credit cards to register with the site, which makes it somewhat more difficult to achieve, but, not impossible. Do you think we've got to the point where there's widespread cynicism about the validity of these reviews? Ika, do you want to have a go at that one?
Oh, look, I see a lot of concern among writers, as Bronwyn has just said, oh, someone gave me a 1-star review and I just have to wear it. So I see a lot of kind of worry from the side of the people being reviewed. But I also see and there is the kind of about vote washing, sock puppetry and so on. But there is also a much more kind of playful way of gaming the system, whereby the Amazon review has become such a kind of recognizable genre. Mm-hmm. That it's now become a site for kind of creative play, for parody. There's been various kind of consumer items that have had parody reviews and become kind of bestsellers as a result. But there's a book of random integers, which I guess is for mathematicians to kind of flip through and find random integers, which has got some wonderful Amazon reviews going. I laughed, I cried, I couldn't believe I was waiting for number 9 to get together with number 307. Page 1,000. So there's a kind of a sense that we know what a review looks like, and then we can start kind of messing with that form a little bit and kind of applying the wrong kind of review to the wrong kind of product. I think one of the other things I really have kind of enjoyed in a slightly ambivalent way is review mocking. Mm-hmm. So people who will collect kind of 1-star reviews of books that are considered kind of great or canonical and go, oh, how stupid would you have to be not to like Moby Dick or what it might be. So you collect kind of often very short and to be fair, often relatively illiterate 1-star reviews of kind of the literary classics and kind of use those also for humour. So there's a bunch of different ways in which I think the review has become a social creative site, as well as simply a kind of talking about a consumer product, or indeed talking about the quality of a piece of literature.
Yeah, no, they're good examples. When you talk about spoof reviews of consumer items, I'm thinking of that Two Dogs Howling at the Moon meme about a tacky, kitschy T-shirt that started to become assessed as though it were a great work of art. And I can think of another, as reviewing and the idea of taking critical authorities becomes something that's democratically assumed in a social media age. I can think of a notorious flophouse hotel here in Melbourne that was starting to show up on TripAdvisor as a place where you might seriously consider having a holiday, and we're talking about it in terms of comparing it with a 5-star hotel and this sort of thing. I also take your point about the 1-star review of the classics. The Literary Hub website likes to get, the top 20 1-star reviews of Ulysses by James Joyce, and it's a collection of people saying, I learned very little about Dublin from this book, and things like that. So is this the final inversion of the democratic idea? It was meant to be that ordinary people did have cultural expertise, and now it's been turned on its head to show that these ignoramuses wouldn't know great literature if they saw it.
Oh, I'd like to ask a question of the panel, actually, which is, how many of us review?
Yeah, good point. I read them.
Yeah.
Like if I've read a book, and pretty much any book I finish, if I don't know someone who's read it who I can talk to about, I will scan the Amazon reviews. And I've noticed that you get different kinds of average star ratings if you compare the US and the UK review sites, for example. Corinna, I'm not sure how that works in Germany too. Do you get markedly different review averages across language groups?
I think probably in Germany, I mean, obviously we have less overall readers of the language that is being published in. So, you get more visibility with less reviews. I think most of the patterns that we've seen about, people reviewing other people's work, and these kinds of scandalous things have also happened in Germany, but maybe not quite so heavily, because, and this is something that actually ties in really well with the question that you just asked. I think that in Germany, much more so than in the Anglophone book industry, we still have a very, very split sense of high culture and middlebrow culture, if you want to use those terms. So in German, it's Belletristik and Unterhaltungsliteratur are really two very different genres. And so I do think that the Amazon review may not have that much of an impact, because it has, there's these two poles that books are sorted into kind of automatically anyway. So, but just to answer the question, yeah, I haven't ever written an Amazon review. Obviously I review in other places, but I do read them. And I think, all ironic kind of comments aside, I think we can learn a lot about how our canon is viewed from reading them too, So there's that too. These 1-star reviews, they can also teach us something about what we should be teaching as, professors of literature.
Corinna, I know you were also quite keen to think about Amazon in terms of a digital publishing communication circuit, something that you talked about quite a bit in book history. Is this the sign that readers are obviously no longer just the passive recipients of communication, but are the readers also the authors now, the reviewers, the publishers, the critics? Have all these roles just blurred?
Yeah, I mean, there is a leveling of the playing field, and we in book studies or book history, we like to go back to the Darnton Communication Circuit, and here's a shout out to Padmini Ray Murray and Claire Squires, wonderful colleagues working on, as we like to sometimes say, 21st century book history. And in 2012, they put out a reworking of the communication circuit, which was called the Digital Publishing Communication Circuit. And basically it goes through the different actors of the industry, from author to reader. But it really shows how, it doesn't show the blurring maybe as much, but it shows how readers really have a lot of new roles. They're no longer just readers, they're also, some quoting from the circuit here, readers as consumers, readers as borrowers, readers as content generators and reviewers, readers also as crowdfunders. And I'd like to add, this isn't in the circuit, but especially in the Amazon context, I think it does play a role that readers are also become resellers of books, and that find a different place in the circuit once again. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I guess this is really taking us through to something that happens 10 years after the Amazon Reader Reviews startup, which is the launch of the Kindle, or Kindle One as we now think of it, in 2007. And Simon, this is where I'm going to throw to you again here. Is Kindle the first time that reading becomes very much not just a receptive activity, but an active data producing activity, which is sending data upstream to Amazon as well as receiving book content downstream?
Yes, certainly. So one of the things that Amazon did when they launched the Kindle was they weren't sure what was going to work in terms of reader tracking. So they just tracked everything. And then some of these, they conclude in awkward ways. So for example, if you highlight something on your Kindle, it then goes into a database that says, this is a word the person doesn't know. And it's quite easy to mis-highlight something. So you can highlight the, and it will give you the definition of the. And then Amazon will have a data point that says, Simon does not know what the means. And then
how's that feel, Simon?
you can extrapolate someone's reading level from that. And they actually did some research that they patented that said, okay, we take this database about what vocabulary this person knows, and then we're going to change the content of the book according to the words that they don't know. So we will remove the word the from Simon's book, and then there are no articles. So there are some scary ways in which they're trying to use this data that aren't entirely effective. So some of this move towards using reading as data points hasn't been entirely effective, but certainly some of the more active forms, such as the highlighting function, have been far more useful in understanding what people actually like to read. And there are some great examples of this. So in the Steve Jobs biography by Walter Isaacson, every song of classical music has been highlighted for someone to create a playlist for. In 50 Shades of Grey, every instance to wine has been highlighted. And we can't speculate why that might be, but you can see the more playful ways in which people read and share these readings amongst this community that developed on the Kindle.
Wow. Well, I'll hazard a guess at the 50 Shades of Grey is that they launched a range of tie-in wines that were called White Satin and Red Velvet, because I show an image of these in one of my undergraduate lectures for a laugh. So perhaps this was a way of promoting the tie-in line that they had. I mean, clearly what you just said about the possibility of changing the text of a book in response to words that readers don't know have got horrendous dumbing down potential here, and that the author's work is being pitched at a level in which the audience wants. So it's a huge change in the relationship between authorial and reader power. But it's not all as big brotherish as this. Like I've seen some of your work presented at conferences where you show readers are actually using Kindle highlights and other Kindle affordances to do completely unpredictable and quite subversive things with their Kindles.
Mm-hmm. So the best example of this is the dictionary. So by default, the Oxford Dictionary of English, 2nd edition, was installed in every Kindle so readers could look up the definitions. What particularly younger teenagers found out that they could use this to chat to one another, and were using it as this ad hoc chat room. And then this community moved on to popular young adult books. So the Hunger Games took a community. So it was this way of teenagers chatting on the internet in a unfiltered capacity, because parents were giving teenagers these devices thinking, oh, there's no way in which the Kindle can be used to chat with anyone else. But then these teenagers found a way to do so regardless.
Is this the modern equivalent of looking up dirty words in the dictionary that you can chat to your mates while reading the Oxford English Dictionary?
Interestingly enough, there weren't any highlights for the dirty words, so it was purely on the book level rather than the individual words. So times are changing.
Alrighty, I was going to see if I, just to prove that my 50 Shades of Wine book merchandise is not a complete ruse, I was going to see if I can screen share this one with you, which I hope might be coming
great.
through.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go, 50 Shades of Wine. It reflects the intimacy or the sensuality pervading every encounter between Anastasia and Christian. So there you go, it can happen. Rachel, I feel like we haven't been drawing you into the conversation as much as we should, but you're the one who's actually been in the Amazon stores and seen the way the reviews and the reader content is actually used in a retail environment. Can you talk to us about how that works out in practice?
Yeah, it's really fascinating because walking into the Amazon bookstore in Portland, it feels like you're physically going into the online space. There's a lot of the things that Amazon does really well online that then gets translated into the physical space. So a few of the things that they do that are really interesting. One is that they have little plaques or cards for each title, and they don't include prices. So it's very interesting that Amazon relies so much on price to that's why a lot of readers go to Amazon to buy books, and yet that's not something that they really promote in store, and that's because the price changes if you're an Amazon Prime member or not. So so I actually have a picture of like my husband with his phone. Basically, you can use your phone to enter the app and hover over the barcode that's on the particular card, and it takes you to the site and tells you what price for, if you're a Prime member or not, which is kind of fascinating. But they have other ways in which they try to integrate. I mean, customer reviews are a really big part of those place card plaques, and they're changed out pretty regularly. The date of the particular card is on there, and they have names of customers that they're highlighting their reviews. So Nancy A says, such and such about 50 Shades of Grey. But they also highlight other things on the cards beyond just customer reviews. It's mostly that, but there are other things like highlighting awards. This one won the Man Booker Prize, for example, or talking about if it has a particular high rating. So maybe 96% of the reviewers, the customer reviewers of this book gave it 5 stars. Then that would be something to highlight on the particular place card. It's kind of interesting to see how customers have become, in a way, much like book selling staff in an independent bookshop. So instead of having like a staff pick or things like that, it's a table based on books that have a 4.8 or higher overall review, collective review from the customers at Amazon.com. So it's really interesting to see how that works there. It's really quite interesting to see how their recommendation algorithm then translates into the physical space, because it's very much, use of arrows and kind of, if you like this, pointing to, Crazy Rich Asians, then you'll like, and then having a row of other books that, it's trying to replicate that same kind of thing that happens a little bit more organically in the online space than it does in the physical one. But it's really, sorry.
That's fantastic. Look, just while you're talking, I've got one shot here that I hope is screen sharing with you now. This was the first of the Amazon bookshops in Seattle. Of course, it had to open in Seattle from November 2015. And I know you're speaking from Oregon where you are, but it's not that far away. It's interesting how they've gone for a really organic looking shop fit out. It's very West Coast. There's a lot of timber. It's replicating some aspects of the website, but it's clearly meant to look deliberately non-virtual in certain ways as well. I'll just take that one down and see if I can. I know Rachel's taken a number of terrific shots, and while we're talking, I will also try and get those ones up. But what you just said about the way that the recommendation system online is mimicked in the retail environment is interesting, because the original recommendations going on the Amazon site were themselves an attempt to impersonate hand-selling techniques of a good independent bookseller, or the shelf talkers, as I think they're called in Britain, where the bookshop staff talk about if you loved Lord of the Rings, then you'll love this particular book, which was meant to showcase the independent bookselling staff's expertise, compared with the Borders and the Barnes & Noble staff who had no idea if they were selling chips and fries or books and couldn't have cared less anyway. So there's a sense in which different sectors of the book trade are constantly mimicking and remediating each other's sales techniques in different environments. Rachel, having said that, I read one review when the Amazon store opened up one of them opened up in New York City, I think in the Rockefeller Center, and this reviewer in the New Yorker said he felt that this was a sign of a company that had so much money it simply didn't know what to do anymore. Do you ever get that feeling in the stores?
Oh, well, it's interesting. I kind of had a love-hate moment, because there were actually a lot of things that I think the stores do really well, and there was a part of me that really hated that I liked some of the parts. For example, all of their titles are outward facing, so you can see the full cover, which from a marketing perspective, you know, when you have a little sliver of spine, that's all that you get to see. It's quite nice to see like the full cover of books, but it also speaks to the limited stock that they have, that there are so few books there. It's really only the top, you know, best-selling ones, and that's why they can have everything outward facing like that. So, I mean, I think a lot of people are confused and questioning, you know, why is Amazon interested in getting into the retail space when there are a lot of independent bookshops that are closing?
Indeed. Yeah. Look, I think I've got some of your self-found photographs here going up on screen share now.
Oh, awesome.
Great. Could you just talk us through what we're seeing here?
Yeah, so this is what I was talking about with the little place cards. So you can see the barcodes that are on them, and mostly it was customer reviews. So like the one you can see in the top middle there, from Nancy A. for Born a Crime. But then you also have other things highlighted, like the percentage of reviewers that rated it, you know, 5 stars or more. Other things regarding, you know, it's one of Amazon's 100 young adult books to read in a lifetime, or it's won a particular prize, that sort of thing. So, but you'll notice that there are no prices on there. So that's what the barcode's for, to then scan. Yeah, so that's my husband with his phone scanning it. You can see it loading and then taking him to the Amazon site. So it's this really interesting interaction of the online site and the physical space. And I think one advantage that Amazon has in the physical retail space is that one of the things bookstores have complained about in the past is that they feel like there's a showroom for Amazon. Absolutely. So that people come in, look at the books, get to feel and have the experience, and then look up on their phones and go and, you know, buy it on Amazon for cheaper. But Amazon doesn't have that fear, because okay, if they don't buy it online, that's fine, because it's still the same. So I think that's a real advantage for them, to be honest.
Yeah, so they can showroom themselves. I know that in the Australian context, showrooming is a bugbear of independent booksellers, the feeling that they just present the stock, have the conversations, and then the purchase goes through someone else. So here we've got your sense here of recommendations. If you like this, you'll like that.
Yeah, so they'd have whole bookshelves of those. Yeah.
It's fantastic. Thank you. I haven't actually been able to walk around in an Amazon store because I haven't been in the States in the last few years. So this is terrific to see how they're changing the big box retail environment and giving it its own particular kind of spin. I guess when we're talking about this self-conscious display of readerly tastes, we should probably zoom out from Amazon a bit and look at some of the other ways in which reader culture works in online spaces. And one of the things that strikes me in having that discussion is we now, when we talk about Amazon, have to talk about Goodreads as well, because Goodreads, the dominant reading social networking site, also kicks off in 2007, the same year as Kindle, and then is purchased by Amazon in 2013. Probably not coincidentally, it's 2012 is the year when Goodreads goes supernova, so to speak, and its subscriber numbers increase incrementally. And now we see in the Goodreads bookshelf displays, people cultivating a very specific image of themselves, books they've read, books they want to read, favorite books of all time. When I say this, I'm conscious that we're all sitting in front of our bookshelves with artfully curated displays behind us as well. Bronwyn, would you like to talk to that one? Or Corinna, you're both doing this as we speak.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm writing a book at the moment about literature and social media, and one of the things that fascinates me is the idea of displaying your reading. And I think, my book historian colleagues tell me that, there is quite a long history of people, kind of passing off the fact that they've read such and such a book when they may well not have actually read it. And, the kind of cultural capital that goes with saying that you're well read and, sitting in front of well-stocked bookshelves and all the rest of it. And I think online, people are finding quite visual ways to do this. So the, Instagram community, people are posting books with other objects and kind of displaying their reading in that way. And on sites like Goodreads, I think what I'm interested in there is the kind of sheer quantification of reading that goes on, and the idea that reading lots is good and being a reader is a good thing, that you want to kind of identify yourself as a reader in various ways. And I don't think that's new, but it does seem to be maybe kind of in the past it would have been frowned on as perhaps, empty consumerism or something, and maybe it's becoming more acceptable to kind of proudly display your reading in not necessarily in terms of actually talking about your reading, but just, as I say, kind of asserting your readership.
Yes, there's certainly been a huge cultivation of bibliophilia in online spaces like this. And while it's not new, the kind of gamification of that, the winning of awards and badges and metrics and little, fitness tracker-like feed-outs of how you read and how many pages per hour and how many books you finish of the books that you start, this has created a kind of competitive logic that underpins self-tracking devices and definitely underpins Goodreads as well. Ika, I know you were keen to talk about the way that this potential for meshing social media and reading can lead to collaborative reading formations that we've not really seen before.
Yeah, maybe I can add to Bronwyn's note about how historically we also have this kind of, there's a beautiful term that was coined in the 20s about bookaflage, domestic bookaflage, of camouflaging your walls with books. So that people think that you've been reading, and in a recent article, I tried to use that concept of domestic bookaflage and say, well, now we have a social media bookaflage on our shelves, on Goodreads, on Facebook, on all of these different areas. And one place where that really I think is very interesting right now is there's a move towards book subscription boxes coming out of book clubs, such as the Book of the Month Club in the United States. And there's also that, on the one hand, members are reviewing books, which then in turn gets other members to buy the books. And then again, they are supposed to review them and have their own little bookshelf thing. So you see that there's copying of these Amazon ideas into different frames, maybe. And the Book of the Month Club obviously is a long-standing, almost 100-year-old company that has now gone completely digital, except for the fact that they send you a hardcover branded book every month. So everything else is online, but they still work with the hardcover book, and all of the other things, the reviews, and this meta level of reviewing and being a reviewer and then being a member, that all happens in the online space.
When you talk about the book subscription boxes, I'm just a little unclear about what that is. Could you flesh that out for me?
Yeah. Okay, so traditionally a book sales club would have been that you got a mail order catalog, you would buy something, choose it from the catalog, and today this whole idea of subscription boxes, there's subscription boxes for food like HelloFresh or Blue Apron, and there's also that movement for books. And I'm trying to see if I have one on hand right there, but I don't. Anyway, so you order your books, they come in a box. Usually there's some extra swag in there, a wine koozie or a notepad or something. There's a lot of unboxing videos online where people, are unpacking their box. And there's about, so if you look at there's about this July, I was looking at numbers and there were about 200 different subscription book box offers that you could subscribe to if you were living in the continental United States. So there's a real move towards, ordering your books, but they're curated. And I think that's that's a term that we still need to talk about a bit. They're curated and they add the candles that match the theme of the book, or they add the wine that matches the theme of the book and that kind of thing. So that's what you're getting with the subscription box that you're not getting if you just buy the book on Amazon. You're getting that extra special curation and targeted to your tastes.
Yeah, I can see this is the anthropological approach to books, books as lifestyle items. Ika, I know you also wanted to talk about Wayne Booth's concept of co-duction, which I'm not familiar with. Can you fill us in on what that is?
Yeah, look, it all goes together. I was just thinking about how, on the one hand, we can think of this as these kind of unboxing videos, as this ultimate kind of selfie culture, very isolated, but it's also incredibly social, right? It's one of those things that trying to turn books into a shared moment temporarily, which I think we saw starting to happen with Harry Potter, that it was like you all have to read the same book at the same time, and trying to actually create sort of real-time shared experiences of reading. And we see this in all kinds of ways. But my students will also tell me that they read together they use Goodreads not as a kind of review archive site, but to read simultaneously. So they will be going, I'm up to page 67. Have you seen this thing that's going to happen? So they can actually be reading the same book at the same time across space, and they will use Goodreads for kind of dialogue. And this is one of the things I like about it is this concept that Wayne Booth has called co-duction, where he says that the way that we interpret literature is always communal. So it's neither deductive nor inductive. It's not, in some ways, it's not a kind of logical process, but we share our interpretation. Going to see the movie The Color Purple with his wife, and he comes out going, oh, I'm just in bits. It was so moving. And his wife is like, oh my God, it was so cheesy. And he starts going, oh, maybe I was too easily fooled. And she starts going, oh, well, maybe I was too cynical. And gradually they kind of shift their interpretation in the light of other people's, which is certainly my partner uses Goodreads consistently for this. If she reads a book and it bothers her and she can't figure out why, she is straight onto Goodreads and goes, oh, reviewer number 37 has just put their finger on that. It was, it was that scene that I felt it didn't fit with the rest of the book. That's what was wrong with it. And then she can rest. She can get some kind of closure. So I think there are these kind of interesting social forms around the book, but that those social forms are also around or can be around interpretation. I think that not to separate out the social side, we want to have shared social experiences, and the book is simply the excuse for that. But sometimes actually those shared experiences are generating more interesting, more complex, or more personally satisfying interpretations for readers.
Yeah, I love what your partner's doing with wanting to find out what's niggling her about a particular book is exactly the way I use Goodreads and Amazon reviews as well. And I want to come back to that idea as books as the trigger for a digital kind of sociality. But I'm conscious that Rachel just wants to jump in here about the subscription box phenomenon in the US.
Oh yeah, just really quickly, in following up to what Corinna said, because I've been doing some research with children's book boxes, and I think this kind of brings it back to Amazon, because this summer Amazon announced that they are doing a Prime children's book box. And so, you know, then getting into the subscription box space, I think is really interesting. And as I've been talking to owners of children's subscription boxes, they've all talked about what Corinna was saying with curation, with the packaging and the customization being really key to what people enjoy about subscription book boxes, and kind of almost a discovery tool for new books too. So in that way, seeing themselves as very different from Amazon and just putting a book in a box as not the same thing.
Yeah. It's in some ways that Amazon used to be the representation of this digital plethora, that its warehouses were bigger than any possible big box bookstore could hold in terms of inventory. But that's inculcated its own kind of choice paralysis, as now we're just so inundated with possible content to consume that we're desperate for someone else to do the choice for us, you know, to curate the choices, to be our filter, and then package it and present it to us and send it to the door. So we seem to have come full circle here on the idea of whether choice is good or bad. Yeah. We zoomed out earlier when we were talking from Amazon to look at Goodreads and the way that it's been absorbed into the Amazon empire. What Ika was saying just a moment ago reminds me that readers self-documenting in an online space is bigger, of course, than just anything in the Amazon empire. With lit blogs, booktubing, where people talk on YouTube about books and do talking head book reviews, bookstagramming, terrible neologism, but you get what it means, Twitter hashtags around reading, fan fiction and community sites. Is it wrong to focus too much on Amazon? Is Amazon just the tip of the iceberg? And in fact, reading, which was often seen as quite solitary activity, has been a hugely productive trigger for people to network around digital media. Any takers?
Well, I'm just going to jump in. I think we should do it all, you know. There's enough of us.
There's a research project waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Bronwyn, what about you? I know that you spoke earlier about the fan fiction gift economy and the idea of beta readers who would edit and comment on other people's work, and the idea of story being communally owned, not at all something you could alienate towards one particular individual. Is this represented in social media?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I guess one of my interests is the idea of how reading kind of often slips over into generating your own content, creative content. So, you know, I'm conscious that, you know, this event is part of a writers' festival, and you know, I was watching recently a broadcast in the UK where a UK crime writer who was, you know, very keen to talk about diversity in publishing was really lauding online publishing, self-publishing, and saying, you know, why aren't you talking about the digital? Because the conversation was all still about kind of traditional publication routes. And I think, you know, so I think for those of us who are interested in creativity and empowerment of readers and so on, I'm just conscious that as we're having this conversation, what tends to happen to me a lot is that I end up sounding like I'm a salesperson for Amazon, or you know, that we're kind of excited by all this new stuff that's happening, and I'm sure there are people out there sort of probably banging their tables, sort of thinking, you know, but what about the evil empire that's, you know, destroying kind of independent bookstores and all the rest of it? And I think, you know, it is important to acknowledge that there are lots of people who actively detest Amazon and boycott it in kind of all, you know, and Goodreads is another example of, you know, that people often use of something that may have started off with kind of good intentions and then it's taken over and becomes, you know, another organ for selling us things. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to kind of register that sort of slight, you know, caveat to the sort of maybe overly optimistic tone of some of our discussion. You know, myself included, as I say, I tend to get very excited when I talk about the stuff that's happening now, but, you know, just to kind of record, you know, the fact that for many people there's a very different side to the story, which is much more negative.
Look, I agree with you. And having spent the last couple of years of my life writing a lot about Amazon for the book, I was really torn by that, wanting to acknowledge the impact it had on the book industry and not just to demonize it in a political economy 101 way, and yet to be aware of the really nefarious business practices that are often involved. That's quite a good segue to the last sort of moments of discussion we've got. First thing to mention is that Anne Steiner from Sweden has been able to join us now, which is terrific to see you, Anne. Thank you so much and welcome. Could you just briefly introduce yourself in terms of your institution and the disciplinary background that you come from?
Yeah, hi. I think I know most of you, but not all. Is my mic on? Because I'm not...
You're sounding good.
Yeah, okay. So I belong to publishing studies at Lund University in Sweden, and I did write on sort of readers' reviews on Amazon, but that's quite a few years ago. It was sort of more 2009, 2010. And I haven't really done work on that since, and it has changed obviously quite a lot. So that's my background. I've done quite a lot on basically sort of digital sales systems of different kinds. So a lot of that I've done as well. And I'm trying to open my champagne here.
Yes, charge your glasses, everyone, because we're in the last couple of minutes here. I must say, Anne, you have the most intimidatingly well-stocked bookshelf of any of us on display behind you. I've just got a sunset, but you've got 4 or 5 bookshelves all behind you. Very impressive, and I can even identify some of those books that you're sitting in front of. And that, apart from introducing Anne, might be the perfect segue for us to just move into a last cluster of discussion points around what it might mean for people like us who study the book industry in an academic context. What do all these digital resources do for us? What kind of avenues do they open up, and what kind of methodological problems potentially do they open up? I mean, to start the discussion on that point, it strikes me that for years, people in the Society for the History of Authorship, Reading and Publishing fantasized about having a database of what real readers actually thought of what they were reading. And finally, with the advent of something like Amazon Reader Reviews, it felt like we'd achieved that. Is that overly optimistic?
Yes.
Go for it, Ika. Shoot me down.
I mean, look, we certainly have more than we have had for other periods. With so much more data, we have got something. We have got a lot more stuff, a lot more record of what people are doing. But what we haven't got, I think, is an unfiltered or an unmediated record of people's actual responses while they read. What we have is a kind of book talk that's produced in a context for an audience for a reason and with a particular kind of genre in mind. So I'm thinking, I mean, this is a really kind of trivial example in a way, but I'm thinking about a review that I posted on Goodreads, which was it was a very annoying book, and it was a very negative review, and it was almost deliberately in the style of those kinds of 1-star reviews that gets parodied, because I was like, this book does not deserve my critical attention. So I think the review kind of went, this book was really boring, and I kept thinking that I wasn't going to finish it, but then in the end I kind of did. And I really enjoyed that kind of very deadpan, very kind of almost deliberately dumb, insolent tone that I hear in a lot of 1-star reviews. So it was true. It was a true record of my experience, but it was also a very deliberate attempt to write in a genre that I actually quite like. So, and Allington and Benwell have done some work, even with kind of face-to-face book groups, and found and kind of done discourse analysis and watched people's opinion about a book be gradually kind of skewed round to the group consensus. And I think maybe particularly the other side of that sociality of spaces like Goodreads in particular is that there is a kind of form. And I mean, another part of that is if you look at Goodreads, you and my partner and everyone who goes on trying to find those diamond reviews he's sifting through an awful lot that are basically repeating the blurb on the back of the book. So there is a feeling that this is what a review should look like, and I'm just going to obediently reproduce that, and it doesn't tell us, especially as it becomes more and more kind of compulsory to go online and say something about a book. I think it tells us less and less about what people are really thinking.
We've been given the clearance by the Writers' Festival coordinator to go slightly over time, which gives me the chance to bring Anne in for more detail here. I think she may have got wrong-footed by the daylight savings time start. But Anne, I've read your work about Swedish book bloggers. How do you find this data pool as a research resource to work with?
The problem, well, as a work resource, it's very difficult actually, because it's so dynamic and it changes constantly. And as a researcher, to say something, it will immediately, and I think we all experience that working with sort of digital environments, it changes so quickly. So what you'll do, it'll become sort of old before it's even published.
We may be losing this sound there, Anne. Keep going.
Sorry, did my sound disappear?
Sound dropped up, but I think you're back now, so please finish your point.
Sorry, I sort of lost my point there, but don't worry. No, what I was trying to say is that there are a few different things. The one thing is that it's very problematic to look at the digital environments as a researcher. And the other point is that some of the things that you talked about now is not what I experienced. It's not that they are repeating sort of general ways of the blurb of the book, but there is a lot of feeling out there, especially when it comes to sort of certain kinds of genre fiction, that writing in style with or in sort of knowledge of the genre. And that is very, very different from what you can find in sort of professional forums, but also on blurbs or whatever.
Yeah, good point about the expectation of readerly knowledge of genre conventions. I take it. Corinna, I know that you're keen to talk about the Reading Experience database and some of its offshoots. Can you just gloss what that is for our viewers?
Yeah, so as a book historian, obviously, as you've said, we now have all this reading data. It is kind of a dream come true on the one hand, but on the other hand, the question is how to pinpoint it and then make it searchable and also extract it from the areas where it is to be found right now. There's a project called Reading Experience Database, which covered, I think, about 400 years of reading up to 1950. And now there's a follow-up project called Read It, which stands for Reading Europe Advanced Data Investigation Tool. And it's a transnational project that is trying to build a large-scale open access tool to have access to these kinds of reading experience moments. So evidences of reading experience, but not as Amazon reviews, not necessarily there and there, but searchable and comparable over national context. So that's a project, and I can link that into Twitter with the hashtag so people can look at that if they'd like to.
Thank you. Another thing that strikes me is, Simon, you've done research, obviously, as we've mentioned, around Kindle and Amazon. What are Amazon like to try and work with? Ever reached out to them and got a good response?
No, never a good response.
Never going to happen.
One of the other challenges and the reasons we need these kind of projects that Corinna mentioned is that Amazon are very flaky in terms of preserving their resources. So the highlights database that I used extensively, they've just taken that entirely offline. And when they acquired Goodreads, they started to shut down their other social reading sites. So one of the challenges for preservation is actually getting this data from Amazon, because otherwise we're going to have this real dark age of we've got all this data now, but if we don't actually extract it, then what happens in 20, 50, 100 years time when people are trying to figure out what the early 2000s were like? So that's probably one of the greatest challenges, is encouraging Amazon to see the value of this data beyond the marketing and the sales and what it actually tells us about book cultures more broadly.
Yeah, this is a great point, Simon, because one thing that strikes me is as book history research gets increasingly digital, we've got to start to shift some of our methodological assumptions. And when I think back about the way the history of reading's been constructed by a lot of important researchers since the 1980s, there's almost this expectation that reader records and publishing records will ultimately enter the public sphere, that you will be able to get them from a library or an archive, or they'll be at the University of Reading, or ultimately it may take time and some of the good letters from famous authors will be cherry-picked, but it will enter the public domain. Now we're shifting into a digital environment. We can't make that assumption because these companies don't work on the basis of public domain thinking and philosophy, and they often work from the assumption that data is perennially valuable. It's worth hanging on to, even if, as Simon's just said, it's no longer prepared to make it publicly accessible. So I think the academic discipline of book history needs to start to shift the way it thinks about its empirical research basis and the idea that inevitably things will flow into the public domain. You know, in the era of algorithmic culture, I don't think we can keep making that assumption. Has anyone had any other experiences with working with digital resources where they've been able to capture the data themselves, or they've had a particularly receptive response from a big data organization?
Sorry, go on, Anne.
Yeah. We've tried to work with different big sets of data, as in there's one of those kind of fan fiction forums in Sweden, very large, and we worked with them to use their data and in that way being able to store it and also be able to do research now, but also keep it for the future. But it really requires that kind of engagement from the forum itself. In this case, obviously a non-commercial forum, but we're trying also to, one of the major things in Sweden at the moment is sort of audiobook, ebook streaming services, the kind of pay-per-month streaming services, and they actually been quite willing to work with us researchers, and we're doing projects with them now. Because then we learn a lot about where readers stop reading, where they stop listening, and we get actually amazing sets of data from that. And so far, they've been very willing to share, and we hope that continues. But when we work with commercial partners, obviously, it's a lot more complicated.
Yeah, Bronwyn, you had an experience that had some similarity?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I was just lucky, but when I tried to contact Amazon to get permission to use one of their discussion, to post something on one of the discussion groups, they said, fine, go ahead. Whereas Goodreads kind of flatly refused to help us at all. And I think, you know, like Anne had very mixed experiences, but a key thing with the online communities and fan cultures was, you know, that you would be much more likely to be granted access if you had a track record and a history, you know, so that you weren't just parachuting in, using the data and then disappearing off. Whereas if you were kind of genuinely interested in the community, you'd be more likely to have positive reception.
Yes, that echoes a lot of long-running debates in audience studies around who's got the right to study whom, and you know, who gets to be subject and who gets to be object. I'm mindful of the time, and I just wanted to give a shout out here on Twitter to Misty McPhail in New South Wales, who has been researching writers' festivals and digital writers' festivals, who is watching our broadcast while cooking dinner and has sent a photo prove it of her cooking while watching us. I encourage everyone to get on DWF 18 and check that one out. But I'm also conscious our viewers have booked in for an hour, and we might be overextending their patience. So I think it's time to charge those glasses, ladies and gentlemen. This is the moment where we launch the said book. I'm just going to reach behind me for the Bollinger, just a moment. Here we are. A bottle of Superior Plonk there, and a glass as well. Look, I wanted to say it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you tonight. I felt like a news anchor occasionally throwing between like an election night broadcast with all these different time zones and different people. But your generosity and your willingness to riff on all things digital and literary has been a complete pleasure. So charge your glasses. If this were a boat, I would smash the bottle over the bow. But as it's a book, I'm just going to say, I hope the book is well launched. I certainly feel it has been in your good company. So all the best. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.